The first time they called me redundant, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because for 12 years, I had been the person making sure their entire business was legally allowed to exist. My name is Clara Hayes. I was 45 years old, and I worked for a biomedical supply company that handled millions of dollars in medical-grade materials every year. My job was invisible. I managed federal compliance, state licenses, safety certifications, inspection records, and regulatory renewals. I maintained the credentials that allowed our warehouses to receive and distribute restricted biomedical products. Executives rarely asked what I did. They only noticed that everything worked. Then Preston Cole arrived. He was 30, wore expensive suits, carried a tablet everywhere, and had been hired as an efficiency consultant. During his first tour of my department, he stopped beside my desk and stared at my filing cabinets. "Do people still use paper?" "Some regulators require physical records," I explained. He smiled. "That's exactly the kind of outdated thinking we're eliminating." I knew immediately what he meant. Me. That evening, I stayed late and reviewed every professional credential connected to my name. Then I opened my original employment contract. I'd kept it for 12 years. Near the back was a clause almost nobody in management had ever noticed. My professional licenses and certifications were tied to my personal credentials. If the company terminated my employment involuntarily, those credentials remained under my control. They could fire me. They could replace my desk, but they couldn't force me to keep their operation licensed. I saved copies of everything. Then I waited. Within 2 weeks, Preston announced a company-wide restructuring. Everyone had to re-interview for their own jobs. People with 10 years of experience were sitting across from Preston, explaining why they deserved to keep working for a company they had helped build. When my turn came, he barely looked up. "Clara, your role has become redundant." "Which part?" "Compliance administration, manual tracking, regulatory documentation. Those are legally required. We have software now. Software doesn't replace a licensed professional." He smiled. "That's your opinion." "No," I said calmly. "That's a regulation." He ignored me. A few days later, my responsibilities were transferred to Emily, a 26-year-old marketing assistant. She was smart, but she had never handled a federal safety audit in her life. Preston didn't care. He told me my old duties were being streamlined. Then he removed my database access and assigned me to reorganize the supply closets. I spent the next 3 days sorting boxes while Preston walked past me talking about how much money the company would save. Nobody understood what was happening. They thought I was being humiliated. I knew I was being released. On Monday morning, Preston called a department meeting. He stood in front of everyone with a termination packet. "After careful consideration, we've decided your position is no longer necessary." I accepted the papers. No argument. No tears. I signed. "Can I have a copy?" He handed it to me. I put it in my folder and walked out. At the security gate, I returned my badge. The guard looked uncomfortable. "Are you okay?" I smiled. "I'm finally free." The moment my employment officially ended, I completed the paperwork I had prepared days earlier. I voluntarily surrendered my licensing authority. The credentials were attached to my name, and without an authorized license holder, several of the company's biomedical distribution operations could no longer legally continue. I didn't call Preston. I didn't warn the executives. I simply went home. For the first time in 12 years, I had nowhere to be. By Wednesday morning, the company began falling apart. The warehouse couldn't release certain shipments. Suppliers demanded proof of active authorization. A major client suspended a contract. The compliance portal rejected attempts to put Emily's name where mine had been. Preston apparently tried several times to bypass the system. Every attempt failed. Then my phone rang. It was Sarah, one of my former coworkers. "Clara, something is wrong." "I know. They're saying our operating credentials are inactive." "They are. Preston says you did this deliberately." I laughed. "They fired me, Sarah." There was silence. Then she whispered, "Can you fix it?" "No." "Why?" "Because they made their decision." By Friday, federal inspectors arrived at the facility. 3 auditors walked through the front doors and asked for the registered license holder. Nobody could produce one. Preston tried logging into my old account. Access denied. He tried using Emily's credentials. Unauthorized. He called technical support. The answer didn't change. The company wasn't dealing with a technical problem. It was dealing with a legal one. The person whose credentials had kept the operation active was gone. And they had fired her. That afternoon, Sarah sent me another message. "They're panicking." I didn't answer. Then Monday came. Richard Henderson, the company's billionaire CEO, returned from vacation. He walked into the headquarters expecting everything to be normal. Instead, he found frozen shipments, angry clients, failed audits, and executives blaming one another. "What happened?" he demanded. Nobody answered. Then he asked the question that mattered. Who authorized Clara's termination? Every manager slowly turned toward Preston. Preston went pale. Henderson looked at him. "You fired her?" Her position was redundant. "Did you verify her credentials?" Preston said nothing. Henderson grabbed the termination agreement. He read it. Then he found the clause. His face changed. "You didn't know?" Preston swallowed. I thought, "Oh, you thought?" Henderson slammed the papers onto the table. "You fired the person holding the credentials required to operate this division." Preston tried to defend himself. Henderson didn't listen. Within minutes, Preston was fired. But removing him didn't solve the real problem. They still needed someone authorized to operate the business. And there was only one person they could call. Me. My phone rang that evening. I looked at the screen. Richard Henderson. I answered. "Clara, we need to discuss a consulting arrangement. You need my credentials. We need your expertise. You called my position redundant." "That was a mistake." "No," I said. "It was a decision. He offered me money. A lot of money." I declined. He offered me my old position with a larger salary. I declined again. Finally, he asked, "What would it take to bring you back?" I looked around my quiet apartment. For 12 years, I had given that company everything. My time, my expertise, my loyalty. And when someone younger arrived with a tablet and a few corporate buzzwords, they decided I was worthless. So I gave him my answer. Nothing. Nothing? I don't want to return. He went silent. I continued, "You didn't lose your licenses because I wanted revenge. You lost them because you fired the person responsible for maintaining them." Then I ended the call. A few months later, I started my own compliance consulting company. The first client came from a former supplier. Then another. Then another. People who had spent years ignoring me suddenly wanted my advice. And every time someone asked how I had survived being fired, I gave them the same answer. They thought I was redundant. I smiled. They just never understood what I was holding together. For 12 years, I had been invisible. They thought that meant I had no power. They were wrong. Sometimes the person sitting quietly in the corner isn't the weakest person in the room. Sometimes she's the reason the entire building is still standing. And when you remove the wrong piece of the structure, you don't discover how replaceable she was. You discover how much of the building depended on her.